Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Lunchtime seminar. Michael O'Shea is going to talk to us today, and he is a graphic designer and academic based in Edinburgh. He's currently a visiting fellow at the UE. His design practice explores the use of print as a multidimensional form of communication, using materials and form to elevate a message and hopefully provide a stronger emotional connection for the public. So I will just admit these last two people and then you can take it away, Michael. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Karen. Hi, everyone. This quote that I've got up here is by an academic and author called Malcolm Barnard, and it's from his book, Graphic Design as Communication. And it's the way that I view graphic design and how I see social communication. I believe that we're designed by being with designed things. So phenomenology, the philosophy of experience. These objects of communication are part of our built environment, and in a psychological sense, they're really influential. These ubiquitous items create our material culture, and they ultimately shape how we think and feel. So as Karen mentioned, I live and work as a designer and academic in Edinburgh, but I'm originally from Sydney. And before becoming a graphic designer, I studied psychology at Sydney Uni, and that focus towards recognizing and trying to understand human behavior, particularly within different sections of society, has influenced how I approach communication. I've always been really interested in the tactile nature of print through both form and materiality, and looking at what these can offer to elevate communication and influence a response. The type of social shorthand that occurs through referencing other materials, objects, and subject matter, and often within an entirely different context. I'm interested in the empathy that can be shown through eliciting a knowing nod towards the public and acknowledging a more specific social understanding, the type of subtlety and inclusiveness lacking from a lot of visual communication. In the graphic design industry, this form of appropriation or subversion in a way is often referred to as wit, and is normally used to provide a smile and create something memorable, but actually it can and should provide much more benefit than that. I'd like to show two examples of design, and these aren't mine, and they're from opposite ends of the scale, particularly in a production sense, but both achieve the same result by helping the audience understand another perspective, and through empathizing with it, hopefully produce a more compelling piece of communication. They create a connection with the public because they immerse the viewer in the subject matter's world, but they're also both as affecting as one another. So the first one I wanted to talk about, I don't know how many people know the Burrell Collection, the museum in Glasgow. It's recently had an upgrade, and originally the 1970s building took you into what was a Victorian shipping magnate's art collection from Victorian times, and it's a really, really eclectic art collection. So the only way that you could get into the museum was through what was the original doorway to William Burrell's house, and you had to go through this kind of stylized A-frame structure, hinting at a traditional house form. And you're essentially immersed in the world of William Burrell. You got a sense of the man, you got a sense of why the collection was so eclectic, you got a sense of why he was looking at ancient cultures in terms of collecting artifacts from them, etc., etc. Once you had that immersion, you then came out into the gallery, and then you could appreciate the rest of the collection with an understanding of why it was formed and why the pieces were put together the way that they were by William Burrell. Recently, it's just been upgraded, and it's been done for an accessibility reason, which is obviously makes a lot of sense. So it faces onto Pollock Park, which is a huge park. So they wanted to open up doors straight onto the park to allow more footfall from the park to kind of see it. They've also taken out the immersive elements from the front, had more of a kind of reception desk style, and added 20% more space for the collection. But I think in doing that, a lot of people feel that it's actually lost its form of communication through material and through the ability to be able to sort of take the viewer and elevate their experience by actually taking them and putting them in the shoes of the subject matter or the person who created the collection. Saying that, it went on to win Museum of the Year last year. So there's a huge point to having accessibility, etc. But I think it's interesting to think about design and materials in that way, in terms of how they can elevate an emotional response from the public. The other one on the other end of the scale is for a charity called the Calgary Society for Persons with Disabilities. And they've gone into the language of an annual report, and it's printed black and white. It's done on copy paper. It's done as cheaply as they would do it. It's done A4, as you would expect, so that it conforms to everything to sort of sit on people's desks. And they've made one design choice out of the ordinary, and that's to put the staple in the middle of it. And basically that decision means that you're wrestling with this document and you're trying to understand what it would feel like to have a disability, and try and take the most simplest things that we take for granted and to try and maneuver your way through things by having made that change, really. And again, I just think that that's another really, really simple way, an interesting way that you can affect the way that that print can affect the way that people take on a piece of communication and information. So through empathetic design choices, communication can exceed the knowledge that underpins it, delivering a more socially appropriate and human approach. It allows the audience to become active participants in a message rather than passive recipients. What I'm going to do now is just go through my own practice and some of my own work over the last few years. And my work goes into the world of the subject matter, as I think graphic designers should, and really try to understand that world, try to be empathetic to it, and to realize that we're communicating with lots of different cultures and lots of different sectors of society. I also like to include the people and the objects of the subject matter that I'm working with, to make it even more authentic and to also build up that collaboration feeling on things, really. So the first one I wanted to talk through was on Edinburgh printmakers. I don't know how many of you know about Edinburgh printmakers, but it's a fairly large printmakers up here that's been running since the 60s, a real collective and a very community-based printmakers that has essentially continued to grow. So this was creating what they wanted initially was a handout at the Venice Biennale to artists and people understanding the way that Edinburgh Printmakers goes about looking at printmaking and art, etc. So decided to create it as a set of prints. So a wrapped up set of prints that have been screen printed. And then as you open it, it folds out to basically be running in a sort of brochure style, but it's kind of a day in the life of printmakers. So you're going through, you're seeing the presses and the ink and the people, you're seeing some of the artworks that they've printed and things like that. And it's taking you through. And then each is broken up into the 5 different printmaking techniques that they use there. And then each one is actually done as that printmaking technique. And then there's little kind of flashes with there, like something like the etching here, and on the back of it, it talks about the Edinburgh etch, which is quite a well-known sort of safer way that was developed in Edinburgh when it comes to etching in the 70s. So again, you're kind of getting this little bit of feedback as you go through. So again, it just kind of goes through doing that, finding each bit where it changes into the specific style. And again, using that photography to try and get a really interesting take on it. And then at the end, it's got a kind of educational element as well, where it sort of talks you through those processes, where it's redoing their logo in all those different styles, but also talking you through exactly what they have and how to do that. Then it was also replicated as a much simpler, cheaper brochure, but again, it was trying to stay true to that and use the materials that fitted with the original. But also this time when you're kind of wrapping it, you're going into the world of digital. So you're using those digital marks and you're kind of leaving those elements to be quite true to themselves as you're going through it. The next project that I wanted to talk about was for artist Frances Richardson, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of her work, but she does really beautiful, intricate pencil drawings, and she also does quite simplified sculpture. And this was about gambling and currency and kind of winning and losing. So she'd done a whole series of drawings that were around playing cards and those kind of figures, and also doing these kind of really simple sculptures that were almost like ladders that were incomplete and things like that. So almost that idea of kind of going up into something and falling through it because it's not quite there really. All of these illustrations that she does are made up of little pluses and minuses, which I'll show later, but basically she's playing with this idea of kind of win and loss with gambling. And ultimately she wanted to play with this idea of essentially cancelling themselves out. And even this idea of actually, if they cancel themselves out, in theory, is anything there at all in some respects. So basically I was doing the brochure, the gallery invitation and then the gallery brochure based on that. And I wanted to have something that would be really arresting and interesting when you received it, but also kind of take on the elements of what Frances was playing with really. So you get this very clear card that says rub the surface with a coin to reveal. So again, kind of getting involved with money to do that. And then it uses security ink, which hadn't really been used in this way before, but essentially was taking that element from that world. And when you scratch it, it really interestingly takes on the form of looking like it's pencil drawing. So you kind of have something that's not there, and then you can reveal it to find out the rest of the information. And then when it came to the brochure, it takes the pluses and the minuses from that and uses them as simple little coins on the front that you can remove from it. But also here with some of the structures, she uses really simple MDF and just quite large, simple screws into those devices. So again, it's kind of playing with a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver and kind of how that's pushed into the material that's trying to kind of mimic MDF. And so you take off those coins and you can work the brochure both ways to get the sculpture side and the drawing side of the exhibition. And as you go through this, you've got fold outs and things that open up, but you've also got reveals that you use the coins for, again, to kind of scratch on it and to get that happening. But here's a detail of the illustration, as I was mentioning. So that's how she does it with different forms of different weights of pencil, as well as she's going through it. This project was for a commercial printers called Ink on Paper up in Edinburgh. And most printers, when they sort of talking to people and clients, tend to sort of show, again, like sort of beautiful inks or the machinery. And again, that doesn't really, most of them have the same machinery and the same technology, so it doesn't really kind of set them apart. But as a designer and with working with commercial printers, it's the relationship that makes the difference, really. And so this wanted to go into a very black and white world, but it basically just being a conversation that starts at the front and ends on the back. And as you go through, it plays with type, so the language of kind of print and type. And as it goes, you're kind of having these conversations throughout, but they're kind of touching on all that kind of care and response that you get from ink on paper. So again, if something's kind of happened, you'll talk about the fact that nothing is ever perfect when it comes to printing, but what you need is that relationship to be able to set it right. So it's just kind of playing with little bits of type as it goes through. And this was for a project that I'm going to mention next, but they stitched some bubble wrap into something. So again, it's just kind of talking about that and asking that sort of question, and the fact that they'll sort of jump in and try these things where a lot of printers would have said no to it. And again, yeah, just talking about the night shift, but kind of going into using roll to kind of create the press as CMYK, and then go through to the night, just using simple black and things like that. So again, quite simple in the way that it's done, but going into that world. This is for a charity in Edinburgh that works with children and young adults that have learning disabilities, particularly children with autism. And it's a really amazing play centre that's very much unique and bespoke in terms of how they approach play. They create all their own play equipment and use materials and all the sorts of things that absolutely play into people with autism and how they respond to the world and what helps them. So wanted to create what was like almost like a scrapbook, like a feeling that you've gone there, because it's such an amazing experience to be there. It's trying to harness that and get a feeling for it. So essentially, in all the same way that they create something, it's kind of got this rough and ready feel to it and uses things like gaffer tape and bits that are stuck in and things. But everything's kind of thought through in terms of each little bit that's put here can be a kind of introduction, handwritten introduction to the annual report. And then you just have little things that are kind of added as you go through and stuff like that. And just the way that, I mean, even the cover being a French fold kind of has that stability but softness to it. So again, it's kind of that thinking of nothing feels heavy or harsh, but it also isn't trying to be childish in that kind of condescending way that often adults try to get into a child's world. So again, it's that feeling that all these photos were just kind of taken on a phone. There's not that huge amount of money sort of spent on that side of things. It's feeling that you are essentially just laying the copy on top. You're not trying to kind of make the imagery kind of get hemmed in to the way that the copy works. So it's kind of like you're trying to be quite true to it. So it uses materials through it as well, where you have a story and you have a den and the making of the den like they do, and you've got a piece of the den that comes in that kind of reveals that image. Again, all of these were working with the staff and the children and young people to create things, so kind of getting them to make the type for certain parts of it as well. Here was the bubble wrap that I mentioned, sort of going in, but again, kind of then having one of those kind of box taping machines, and then the piece for that is written on that, and that's stuck on top of the bubble wrap with a shot of the inside of a TP that they've created. So basically it's kind of taking through, but feeling like you're going through the center itself and kind of getting parts of it and understanding it. Gone on to do lots of things for the yard and have quite a long relationship with them. This one I thought might be worth mentioning because wanted to do a way to explain to parents the way that the centre works and the way that materials are used and where things are and how it kind of works. So thought that let's get the play workers together and us and the children and young people and actually make the yard out of the materials. So all of this, and it's, to be honest, it's very close to exactly what the yard looks like. So there's quite a bit of work in it, but essentially it's kind of telling you or telling parents as they go through and fold it up with Bible paper into a fold out map that essentially tells you how the yard works and how these materials work and why the yard chooses to have to create play in this kind of way. Another one just to talk through, this was for a copywriter and proofreader. And this is a little envelope with a brochure inside, and the envelope is business card size. So essentially this is her business card to kind of hand out. And it goes through with kind of idioms about taking care and checking things and sort of like the devil's in the detail and things like that. But all the crosses of the T's and the dots of the I's are taken out of them, again, sort of playing with that. And then the dots and the crosses of the T's are put on the front, and that's Morse code for SOS. So essentially, this was kind of going to design agencies and advertising agencies for people who wanted a copywriter and a proofreader, and essentially saying how important it is not to get things wrong. So yeah. I've started to do more and more artist books, and this is one that I've done sort of with working at the University of Edinburgh up here. And the reason I undertook it was we have a program where we'd essentially got some of the master's students to work using the newspaper club and trying to just be as kind of simplified within that format as possible. And I basically thought, well, I'm going to have a crack with them. And so essentially, I wanted to look at this idea of fake news, really, and this idea of this is a tabloid-sized newspaper and kind of looking at this idea of just dealing in facts. So I wanted to kind of play with this idea that from all of us from every side, we can kind of subvert these facts to make them what we want to make them. So essentially kind of wanting to go into the half-tone kind of world of newspaper printing and kind of have all these black dots that make up 100 and then just kind of start to go down to 0 out of them. But each time I've kind of got a fact that plays off the other fact. So I've got 77% of people are worried by the rising cost of living. And then I've got 70% of the wealth is owned by 1% of the population. And it goes on like that. So 48% think of themselves as working class, 43% don't pay any income tax. 29% of MPs went to public schools, 29% of children live in poverty. So you've got these mirrors that are going down, but also interestingly, depending on what side you come from, you'd kind of have a different take on those bits of information to some degree. And the last little bits that I just wanted to talk about is kind of throughout my career, kind of working with different materials and things like that, and just kind of trying that idea of like print and playing with things. And like probably I did these gin bottles, but they're probably the longest production wise I've ever spent on something, which seemed to take years. But it was trying to get this kind of see-through translucence into this bottle and also kind of get the mist coming off out of it and stuff like that. And oddly, it's one of those things that, again, it's kind of referenced from another world in terms of like getting that applied to glass because it hasn't actually been done to that extent before. So you're kind of always playing around with materials and prototyping and trying to get things done, then looking at, you know, getting your foils to match your foils that are used as your kind of closure bands and, you know, making sure everything. So again, like working with those different kind of materials and different forms. Again, doing one, and this is more just a sort of a smile on the face, but this is from a place called Bigger up in Scotland. And this is actually normally like bottles of 75 cl, and this is 50 cl, but it's got a 75 cl label on it. So it's kind of playing on a sort of small artisanal gin company that's kind of got bigger thinking, really. So you've got this little bottle that says big on it. But also this idea that they do it all by hand with one of those little machines that put things together. And normally when you've got a little tag like that, you're kind of putting the two pieces together and folding them in, and it's really difficult production wise. But essentially I thought you could just put a varnish on the end of the bit that sticks and then print on top of the varnish, so that essentially when you roll out the bigger label, it just stops and just comes and just does it itself as a kind of flap. So again, trying to do things and a twist that, you know, is kind of going to be also more cost effective, but interesting from a printing sense. This is another one. This is for the Scottish Poetry Library. And again, just not having a lot of money for signage and things like that. So for 20 quid, basically just getting an oversized bag made and getting shop put on it, you know, so you've just got this massive bag, but that's the bit that tells you where shop is, and kind of the rest of the signage around it does a similar thing where it's just being kind of quirky, but not a lot of notches up to, from a print sense. If someone had to just put some, you know, printed something and put it on foam core, it would have probably cost the same amount. So I think it's just trying to go into that world and think a bit differently about it. And again, on that, just the last one, doing like a, this is obviously before what happened to the Macintosh building at the Glasgow School of Art, but the Macintosh building, the walls inside were gesso. That's kind of how Macintosh had done things. So you had this really kind of porcelain finish to things on the walls and a real sort of texture to it. And so this is an exhibition space. And again, that idea of like everyone's got a different frame and things like that. So it's actually trying to make it look like they've been put up and piece of wallpaper and stuff. But the bit I wanted to mention is the actual boards on the back is Corian. So it's like kitchen, you know, your kitchen worktops. but basically that's got the exact same feeling as gesso. So again, it's kind of taking something that you would use in another space and then kind of flipping it and thinking, actually, what if we were to put these on the wall, and kind of get that feeling of what's happening on the walls in there, but kind of subvert it a little way and use that material differently. And that's it.
Great, thanks very much, Michael. That was really interesting and some lovely, lovely design work. Just really nice to see. Has anyone got any questions?
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Michael.
Hi,
Thanks
Hi.
for an amazing presentation. That was really exciting work to see. Could you say a little bit more where you've said about making more artist books? Can you say why that's come about?
Yeah, basically, I think like a lot of people, I've kind of found that there's a lot that I want to say about what's going on at the moment. And really sort of interestingly, it all, for some reason, I've kind of done about 3 or 4 at the moment and they all seem to be going in this kind of like world of information graphics or data or something. And I don't normally, as a graphic designer, I'm not really into that, but I think I'm kind of, it must just be about truth or fact or something. But I seem to be really fired up with it now in terms of like trying to kind of play with that idea really. And I think sort of play with this, particularly this, I've got something else at the moment where I'm kind of looking at capitalism and democracy. And I think that idea just that we've got of kind of the two being one, but not being the same. And, so I think it's, yeah, just ways of kind of, I guess, a bit like my design work of maybe trying to simplify something and maybe make it engaging in a way, or, that might normally be done in a dry way. I've done another one recently, where I did a report that was created for the Institute of Public Research, and it was basically about people's response to immigration and the fact that since Brexit, it's actually, their research has shown that it's actually getting much more liberal in terms of that. So I think, yeah, I'm kind of like talking to people and working with them to kind of think of ways that I might take like something that's kind of, I guess, a drier report or something and give it a bit more engagement.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very democratic form as well, and accessible, that people aren't afraid to pick up, even if what it might contain might be confronting, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because I think a lot of my design seems to, like have a softly touch to it. So I think, yeah, it's probably my design's got a lot of playfulness to it.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, so I think actually it can do a little bit of that and be a bit more sledgehammer, I think.
Yeah, and sneaky.
Yeah, sneaky, that's right. So that's that thing really, isn't it? It's kind of like I think graphic design and advertising, quite rightly, has often been seen as having that kind of element of sneakiness to it, I think, in terms of its ability to kind of, sell things and kind of just, be in that kind of world. And I think it's really important that those kind of skills that designers get taught, that they start to understand how important they are in the world and how much they set the stereotypes and just the responsibility that they have with that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's all right.
Lovely. Any more questions? No, I think we'll call it a wrap then. Thank you very much, Michael. We have recorded this session, so it'll be edited and up online in a couple of weeks or something. And then the next one is very early in December. So watch the space, and we'll see you all then. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much.